All right, if you are gearing up for the Queensland bar exams, you're going to want to pay close attention. Today, we are diving deep into a seriously powerful tool in your litigation arsenal, Rule 293 of the Uniform Civil Procedure Rules. This is your go-to for knocking out a hopeless case early, saving your client a ton of time, stress, and money.
So here's our game plan. First, we're going to define the problem you're trying to solve, the hopeless case. Then we'll get familiar with your weapon, Rule 293 itself. After that, we'll break down the absolutely critical two-part test, look at the landmark case of Salcedo that shaped it, and wrap up with a practical playbook you can take straight into your exams.
Let's kick things off with a scenario you're bound to encounter. Your client walks in, they've been sued. You sit down, you read the plaintiff's statement of claim, and you just think, there's nothing here. It's a completely meritless lawsuit.
And that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Do you really have to subject your client to the enormous cost, the anxiety, and the delay of a full-blown trial just to prove something that seems obvious from the start? Well, thankfully, the answer is no. This is precisely the problem that Rule 293 of the UCPR was designed to solve.
This brings us to your weapon of choice, Rule 293. You can think of it like the court's bouncer. It's there to stop claims that have no business being there from ever getting inside. But, and this is a big but, to even get the bouncer's attention, you have to follow a very specific first step. And here it is. This is the one you need to tattoo on your brain for the exam. Rule 293, Subrule 1. It says you can only apply for summary judgment after you have filed a notice of intention to defend. I'm telling you, if you get this procedural step wrong, your application is dead on arrival. It's a non-starter.
And don't just take my word for it. The courts are absolutely ruthless on this point. In Alling M.V. Fuller and Mio Art, applications were tossed out simply because no notice of intention to defend had been filed. Then, in McEwen, the court went even further and said a conditional notice isn't good enough. The message is crystal clear. File a full, unconditional notice of intention to defend first, or don't bother applying at all.
Okay, so you filed your notice. You've passed the first checkpoint. Now it's time for the main event. You have to satisfy the two-part test that's laid out in Rule 293, Subrule 2. This is the real heart of the application, and you have to know both parts inside and out.
So, there are two hurdles you have to clear to win. First, under Rule 293-2A, you have to convince the court that the plaintiff has no real prospect of succeeding on their claim. And second, under Rule 293-2B, you have to show that there's no need for a trial. You must satisfy both of these. It's not one or the other. Now, so much of this test comes down to that one little word, real. What on earth does no real prospect mean? Well, Queensland followed the UK's lead here, from a case called Swain v. Hillman. Essentially, it means the plaintiff's case can't be just fanciful or based on pure speculation. There has to be something realistic there. This is a much lower bar than the old days, where you had to show a case was completely doomed to fail.
But this new wording, no real prospect, it wasn't a smooth transition. It actually caused a major judicial argument here in Queensland, which led to a bit of a showdown. For your exams, understanding this debate is absolutely crucial because it defines the law as it stands today.
And here's the clash. In one corner, you had Justice Chesterman and Gray v. Morris. He argued that no real prospect pretty much meant the same as the old high bar test, that a case had to be hopeless or bound to fail. But just 1 year later in the other corner, the Court of Appeal and Deputy Commissioner of Taxation v. Salcedo came out swinging. They flatly rejected that idea and said no, the test is simply the plain words of the rule. So for your exams, remember this: Salcedo is the winner. Salcedo is the binding authority.
Now, even after Salcedo in 2005, there were a few murmurs of doubt. But the Court of Appeal put those to bed for good in 2009 with a case called Bolton Properties. They doubled down and made it absolutely clear that the plain meaning test from Salcedo is the law in Queensland, full stop. The debate is over.
Okay, enough with the history. Let's get into the practical playbook. Because knowing the rule is one thing, but knowing when to pull the trigger is another. Let's look at the classic situations where a Rule 293 application is most likely to hit the mark.
For your exam, these are your green light scenarios. If you see a claim that's clearly out of time because of a limitation period, like in Brew versus Valamont, that's a prime candidate. If the plaintiff has a fatal gap in their evidence, they just can't prove a key element, go for it. Same goes for a clear statutory defense, suing the completely wrong person, or trying to run a claim that just doesn't exist at law. These are the sweet spots for a Rule 293 application. Now on the flip side, here's when you should probably hold your fire. If there are major facts in dispute where a judge really needs to hear from witnesses and see them cross-examined, summary judgment isn't appropriate. The same goes for interpreting a really complex contract, or when the whole case comes down to who the judge believes. If the issue is complicated and needs more evidence to be flushed out, a trial is needed, and your application will likely fail.
So let's bring it all home. The single biggest takeaway, the thing you need to highlight in your notes, is this: the test is the test. The Court of Appeal in Salcedo couldn't have been clearer. Don't try to paraphrase it. Don't try to substitute words like hopeless or bound to fail. The question the judge has to answer is simple. Does this plaintiff have a real prospect of success as opposed to a purely fanciful one? That's it.
And that leaves us with a final, bigger picture thought for you to carry into your careers. Rule 293 is this fascinating balancing act. On one hand, it's about efficiency and protecting people from the burden of baseless lawsuits. On the other, it's about the fundamental right of every person to have their day in court. Whether the Salcedo test has struck the perfect balance between those two powerful interests, well, that's a question the courts, and now you, will continue to grapple with.